Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix. I think it's really hard to think outside of our narrow constraints, outside of our rigid boundaries that we draw. And there can definitely be a place for this, as I've said before. There is definitely utility in focusing on survival, focusing on basic needs, and then building out from there. But I also look at it from the perspective of how there are so many things that we don't even think about. Because we aren't taught to think about them, we're not inspired to be curious, to be creative. And so we often find ourselves to be limited in our thinking because we don't even realize all of the possibilities that are there, all of the things that we could think about if we wanted to, that we could pursue if we wanted to. But with all of our cultural and ideological constraints, all of the ways that we limit thought, often socially, and in terms of the ideas that we conceive, it can certainly be a very difficult world to live in, to try to imagine new ideas. And like I've said, I've explained that I very much would like to imagine new ideas. And that is actually one of the reasons why I like two distinct genres or modes of thought, sci-fi, as well as philosophy. And I think of the word speculative, which is usually implied with the idea of speculative fiction, where speculative is used to indicate this idea that the ideas that you're engaging with in your speculative fiction, whether sci-fi, fantasy, horror, or a mix of those things or something new entirely, that the idea is that you're engaging with ideas that are not necessarily less accessible, but maybe just less thought about. And it's interesting because this is also true in philosophy. When I think of the word speculation, how close that sounds with speculative. And the main point here is to indicate that I like these modes of thought because I like thinking outside of our expected norms. So often we are seen as arrogant for trying to imagine a new path or a new route or a new idea. And while certainly there's a place for using tradition and utilizing familiar ideas, while there's definitely a place for not going overboard and not being too radical in your thought, it's really interesting to think about how there's also this other element where we kind of need the new ideas though. We need the new thoughts, the systems of thought and the approaches that haven't really been considered before. And that's what I find really fascinating about thinking about philosophy and speculative fiction is this pure idea of speculation. It literally is speculation. So when I think of the word speculation, I think of this idea of you're just imagining something. It doesn't have to have a clear end goal. It doesn't have to have an immediate function. It's just something that you pursue. And I find this a lot actually in sci-fi, because usually they're imagining worlds and often it might be through technology or through the exploration of space in the universe. And so those are definitely familiar elements, but I don't even think it's just that. When we think about sci-fi, I also think it's philosophical systems that haven't been thought out, or ideas that haven't been fully teased out, or trying to imagine, as writers have described, the other. And that could be the unknown, or the void, or the things that we might not have expected to think about that are important to think about. The things that we can't imagine. Again, this idea of speculation. Thinking about things that we might not expect or that we might not fully understand, but that are in the distant future, as we could see with Asimov, for instance, and his Foundation books or other sci-fi books. I think of Philip K. Dick. There are so many examples that you can draw on. But the point is that it is a very intense speculation that sci-fi delves into with trying to imagine new worlds. And I think philosophy does the same thing, and it often does it through the mode of thought, through thought itself. And it might utilize logic and reason. It might utilize familiar principles. But especially when I think of philosophers like Alfred North Whitehead, I kind of imagine this whole free-spirited engagement where science is a big influence because of what it communicates and because of the ideas that it conveys. And I love that idea because I think it's incredibly powerful. I think that it's kind of unexpected in a lot of ways and kind of not really clear where it's going to go. But that's the whole point of it, is basically this open-ended inquiry and this kind of way of looking at the world in a new way. And I think that's incredibly powerful to have in your toolkit or in your way of thinking, because I think there are a lot of ideas that aren't clearly articulated, but that we want to explore. Often the things that we think are so obvious or that we think are so apparent are not so apparent at all. And that's why we need speculation. Like, I'm all about new ideas. I love new ideas. But I can totally understand the whole point of having some kind of conceptual structure. And there definitely is something to be said about that. That we want to use tested ideas and ideas that work, depending on what we mean by work. But that's the basic ideas. We want things that have that kind of depth. But I just think it's fascinating because I realize that that's what I care about a lot, is speculation, is the speculative, is kind of imagining this new realm, these new possibilities. And I love being able to think about those things because I think it can be such a powerful springboard for imagining new things. And so the thought that is speculative or that incorporates speculation doesn't have to be limited to speculative fiction or philosophy. Those are simply two places to ground out the thought. But it could really be in any kind of field. You know, as is obvious with the idea of science fiction, that science itself is very much inspired by science and by the kind of whole spirit of science, which is being able to convey this new world, this new realm of ideas. That's why I think theoretical physics is so fascinating, is because even though it does definitely get technical with like the math and like quantum physics and cosmology and what these things are indicating, it's also super interesting to think about how science itself is a spirit. It's kind of this rationalist tradition, or even, it could even be, rationalist or empiricist tradition, where you're thinking about things from a new realm. You think about things, that might sound dramatic, not quite what I mean, but basically this idea that there's something there to explore, something that we might not have expected. And I just think it's such a cool idea. I think it's a cool idea to think that the whole spirit of inquiry, the whole spirit of speculation, no matter what the mode is, no matter what the medium is being able to explore and explain and express and to try to imagine new things. And I think there is so much value in that. And I can't emphasize that enough. As a writer, as a thinker, I think about these ideas a lot because I think it's important that we speculate, so to speak, that we try to imagine. And maybe the ideas will fail. Maybe they don't work. But the idea is the spirit of the inquiry and the determination to think about things in a new way. So yeah, I'm Phoenix. I hope you'll check out my other videos. I hope you'll check out my books. And yeah, thanks for being here. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.